Starting. Mr. Ashok, yours.
Namaskar, good morning and good evening to those in India. Most of you are in India, I presume, but I know you are in different places around the globe. So appropriate greetings for your time. Thank you uh, very much for attending this. And Kumarji told me that there is a more important competing event of cricket going on. So thank you. It's even more appreciated. What I would like to do, it's a small group, and that's useful for a back and forth dialogue too. And although you are muted, which is perfectly fine, but if you want to comment something in the chat, that's fine. Uh, as a title for the talk, I mean, if you are giving a presentation, you need a title and you need a conclusion, in that spirit. I gave a title based on my discussion with Kumarji. So it's the essence of Vedas. What are Vedas? We talk about Vedas. We think there is something in it in our own way, based on our own understanding. But what is there? And if I can take all of our understanding from where it is today to a notch up, then I would consider this successful. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying, this is from Purushottam Yoga 15 chapter. Number of you would know this verse or the end part. Vedescha sarvera ahameva vedyo vedanta krud veda videva chaham. Like by all the Vedas, I am to be known. Okay, now when Krishna is referring here, that I is different than an individual person, Krishna, although Krishna is a personification of what he is referring to. And Vedanta Krut Veda Videva Chaham. He's also the creator of a Veda in a way, and Veda Rahasya Karta. That's how Vinoba has translated. So creator of a Veda and also the mystery behind the Veda, the creation of that mystery. Why it is in a mysterious form? There is a reason for it, and we will also talk about it. But let's start with a little bit of Purva Paksha. And again, if you want to comment something in the chat, that's perfectly fine. If not, try to answer these questions in your mind, okay, before I get further. Like, what do we, and when I say you, I mean you as an individual, know about the Vedas and Upanishad? And Kumarji has given a list, and I like that list because, again, there is a lot of confusion, misconceptions about these different texts. So you would hear the word Vedas. Sometime you will hear the word Samvita. You will hear the word Aranyak. You will hear the word Upanishad, then Puran, Itihasa, Arshakavya, Epics, Sutra, Darshana, and just goes on and on. There is no limit to this. So just thinking of this, or whatever that scope you have in mind, when the word Veda, you hear the word Veda, what do we know? What do you know? What do you believe? What do you feel? What do you do? Okay, and because you are on the mute, I'm going to take you to the next session and see if some of your thoughts, not all of them, seem to parallel what I'm going to show you as a summary. Usually what I do, if I have a group in front of me, it's like a face-to-face interaction. I would ask them, like I will ask at least a couple of individuals to comment and say, what do you know about Vedas? And what do you believe? And what do you feel? And what do you do with it? If somebody asks you with whatever knowledge we have, what is Veda, what would be your answer? And usually we do that, right? As in business, we don't have all the answers, but if there is a problem, we have to solve it. We don't have a choice of not solving it. Same thing when somebody asks us something, what is Hinduism, what is Veda, what is Upanishad? To the best of our ability, we do answer that. Now, these are some of the typical answers I get. You tell me, I mean, in your mind, you can think and see if this resonates with you. If it does not resonate, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. People will generally say, well, Vedas are ancient texts, much revered. We don't know how old they are, but based on their knowledge, say Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, or whatever it is, Rigveda is the oldest surviving narrative, oldest surviving text of humanity, not just India, of humanity. Now that many will accept. Okay, although we will see the kind of timeline they assign, they meaning the Western Europe, and now their lack is in studying in humanities and what different departments, South Asian studies usually, that's the name we get it here in America. Um, in India, you will hear under anthropology and general studies. Rigveda is the oldest, that they agree, but the timing they assign is very different. We'll talk about this. It's not uncommon to hear Atharvaveda is the latest, which is to say as if there is a chronological time period. And we'll talk about that also. The Rigveda came first, and then Yajurveda, and then Samaveda, and then after a long time Rigveda, Atharvaveda. Some of you might have heard such things, whether you believe it or not. So we get into the belief part. Now, people would either believe if they haven't studied it. So like, yeah, I think it has mantras, and they can be chanted for benefit. Usually mantra is chanted for some benefit, even if one does not understand the meaning. Now, why do I say that? I'm not saying it. This is some of the answers people have given me. And they're correct. Many of the mantras that even we chant, say in a daily practice, those of us who do, we may not exactly understand the meaning of it. And that is both good and bad, but that's not the subject today, okay? You would also hear as a belief that need expertise. Somebody needs a special expertise in Sanskrit, not just even ordinary Sanskrit, not just epic Sanskrit, but a very special kind of Sanskrit, because Rigvedic Sanskrit is an archaic Sanskrit. That's also many people would have believed. Is some kind of different Sanskrit. Sanskrit has gone through evolution and whatnot. Rigvedic Sanskrit and mantras may have magical and spiritual powers of Rigveda. That's why we possibly revere it. These are some of the beliefs I'm sharing with you. Or other people who have a different outlook towards, say, ancient text, or who will consider Vedas as a religious text, or even otherwise, they may say, well, you know what, it can be some spiritual mumbo jumbo. I don't know much about it. I have heard about it, and so on. Then what individuals feel, if we're talking about Indians, most of us Indians on this call, most Indians, again, I'm not counting you necessarily, but I'm saying most Indians, this is the feedback I get, feel clueless about it, kind of ignorant. Yeah, I have heard about it, but I don't know exactly what it is. Somebody will say, I tried to read it once, but it didn't make any sense to me. They may feel indifferent, and most think it is beyond their grasp. Now, you'll also find in terms of what they do. I said, if somebody asks them a question, who are you? Where did you come from? India? What is your religion? Hinduism? Okay. What do you know about Rigveda or Veda? Most Indians, I would say, or Hindus would express pride about them as being the oldest text of humanity. And some may feel a bit of a hollowness inside for not knowing anything about these Vedas. Now, for most part, I would say most don't do anything about this situation for a simple reason. At least they will tell you that, in everyday life, not knowing Vedas has not affected them in any significant way. So this is kind of a Purva Paksha I'm giving you. I'm not asking you to agree with it. I'm not asking you to disagree with it. But that is kind of the generic situation. Now, quickly in that context of the Vedas, but also is there a timeline, which is to say the Vedas came first, and then came Brahmanas, and then came Aranyakas, and then came Upanishad, and then came the Itihasa like Ramayana, Mahabharata, and then Puranas. I mean, this is the kind of timeline we hear. There is some truth to it, but not all the truth. Actually, there is much misinformation about it. But just to put something in the perspective and also to summarize my work specifically on the chronology, specific on the dating, goes something like this. The middle axis, again, number of you, you told me in the early introduction part that number of you have seen my videos or read my books. So I'll keep this short. The middle axis is the axis of time. Today is where we are today, 21st century. If you go back to zero, that's the start of the Gregorian calendar, or actually Julian calendar that got modified to Gregorian calendar. If I ask anybody's birth year, and that year is basically in the Gregorian calendar. If we go beyond zero, then we are getting into that BC or BCE area, like before Christ, that is BC, but we should use before Common Era, we being a secular country until we turn Hindu, if that's what the citizens of the country decide to do. So BCE, before Common Era, so minus 5K is minus 5,000 BC, minus 10,000 BC, minus 15,000 BC, and so on. Now, my work of last 30 plus years, it began with Mahabharata. That is again not a subject today. And based on the evidence, or somebody referred to my book on Arundhati, I could establish in a decisive fashion, no ifs, no buts, nothing. If you are going to follow the Mahabharata text evidence, it must, and it would take you to 5561 BCE. Then I started working on the Ramayana. Now, there are many Ramayanas, but if you are doing a chronological study or historical study, then it's only Valmiki Ramayana, because other Ramayanas were written for different purposes, different emphasis in mind. So when I looked at Valmiki Ramayana, I extracted close to 600 specific astronomy references. In case of Mahabharata, close to 300. And when you put them together in a jigsaw puzzle fashion, like solving a crossword puzzle, solving a jigsaw puzzle, with, of course, the logic of scientific methods, and you need a scientific acumen, you need a Tantra Shastra, Tarka Yukti. Again, it fits that crossword puzzle and it takes you to that 12,209 BC. Then relatively recently, I would say like 5-6 years ago, one professor from America of Indian origin in Boston area asked me to study Rigveda from the timing perspective. And we cannot tell, I couldn't tell how far back we have to go. In fact, it goes back to the humanity, the beginning of a language and the beginning of a civilization and all of that. And the evidence gets scant. Okay, so, and I'm going to show you that another map too. But what I could show, not based on astronomy evidence, but based on a hydrology, geology, geophysics, geochemistry evidence, morphodynamics of rivers and changing of river paths, when Saraswati was starting in the high mountains and going all the way to the ocean, like the way it is described in Rigveda, Giribhya Samudra. And then combining that with last 100 and 200 plus years of geology, hydrology research, we can say with a confidence that Rigveda, some portions of Rigveda are definitely more than 24,000 years ago, 22,000 BC and before. Okay, so that's just my quick summary from the timeline perspective. So yes, the epics, the Ityasa, and they are definitely after some of these texts. But one important point, it's not like the Rigveda writing, Rigveda composition stopped at some point. In fact, Mahabharata tells us it was the Krishna Dvaipayana Veda Vyasadeva who recasted, re-edited all the Vedas at the time of Mahabharata, which is more than 7,500 years ago. And so what we get today, all the different Samhitas that we have, Shakal Samhita, Pippalat Samhita for different Vedas, are in some fashion due to the recasting, re-editing, encyclopedic effort of Vyasadeva and then his disciples. So Rigveda, what we have as a Rigveda today is a Shakal Samhita, which comes into the disciplic succession of Vyasadeva, who was a contemporary of Mahabharata. So quickly, if you want to remember this, you can, as a mnemonics, you can remember the multiplication of 7,000. So think of in a simple fashion, if there's only one takeaway, that could be this: Mahabharata more than 7,000 years ago, Ramayana more than 14,000 years ago, and the oldest portions of Rigveda definitely more than 21,000 years ago. So 7, 14, 21. Okay. Now let's get into the subject that we have at our heart, and the first portion, which is to do with what are Vedas and Brahmanas and Aranyakas and Upanishad, and its context for rest of the literature such as Puranas, Itihasas, Sutra, and Darshana literature. Well, just as an example, and I don't want to give you a flood with information, okay, that if you go to Wikipedia and just type Rigveda, type Atharva Veda, type Samaveda, you're going to get all the detailed information. But Rigveda is it. Basically, Rigveda, that's where it begins, okay? Rigveda has 10 mandalas. Each mandala has many suktas, and each sukta has many richas, okay? Now, what is Yajurveda? What is Samaveda? What is Atharva Veda? Okay, just take for a minute Atharva Veda out for a minute. We'll bring it back. But you'll find all the 4 Vedas, all the remaining 3 Vedas have a significant portion from Rigveda. Okay, sometimes slightly modified, and then of course additions, especially Yajurveda and Samaveda. And Atharva Veda also has 1/6 of Atharva Veda is nothing but Rigveda. Okay, so for some of you, this may be a surprise and news. For many others, you may already know this. Now, what is the context of it? We will see that in a minute. Okay, so what's the difference between Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda? The difference is only of an emphasis. Okay, now what are Brahmanas? Think of Brahmanas as manuals for conducting yajna. Now, they do a lot more than just being a manual, but that more thing that they do is coincidental. It's like a byproduct. Okay, because to do a yajna, and right now in our times, unfortunately, or whatever it is, we think of yajna meaning what? Immediately we think of a rectangular structure, there is a fire, there is certain types of wood, and we are giving the ahuti. Of course, that's a yajna. But that's like we are saying when we are celebrating our India's freedom on the 15th of August or 26th of January. Well, that's a symbolic aspect of it. But that freedom we need to practice every day. The yajna is essentially a karma related to activities, okay? Actions, activities, outcomes, and that was done all the time. In fact, it was done with this particular yajna ceremony as the pivot, okay, as a linchpin. And around that, many things took place. But again, I'm not going to elaborate that. So think of Brahmanas as a manual. In fact, not a bad idea to think of a car as a metaphor. So you have a car and then there is a manual for the car, but I'm going to come to that in a minute. What are Aranyakas and Upanishad? Aranyakas, you can think in, again, simple fashion as meditations, okay, insights, intuitions, and philosophical writings based on those intuitions and meditations of the sages, of the rishis and rishikas. Okay, right in the Rigveda times, we had rishis and rishikas. There are 54 rishikas mentioned in Rigveda. For example, some of the famous names you might know actually, like a Yam and Yami, but also Lopamudra, but there are many others. What is Upanishad? Now, Upanishads are very close to Aranyakas. These are also, again, philosophical insights, but Upanishads are the one where the philosophical insights are shared with the students. Okay, and maybe student, I mean, I'm just giving you as a metaphor, students is taking short notes. So sometime if you don't have the other background, and therefore I tell people start with Bhagavad Gita, and then you may go to other Upanishads. Upanishads can come out as extremely abstract sometimes. It's as if it starts in the middle and it ends nowhere. You know, so you need to know the context. That is true for Aranyakas, that is true for Brahmanas, by the way. And frankly, that is true for Vedas also. Itihasa, that's relatively simple. Okay, Mahabharata, Ramayana, we know that. They are also called Pancham Veda. Itihas is called Pancham Veda. And what is their purpose? The purpose is to elucidate the wisdom of the Vedas via historical events. Now, we have not yet got into what is the wisdom of the Vedas. We will do that. But the definition of Itihas is given. There are many definitions, but it's basically Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam Upadesham. For getting this 4 Purushartha, the Upadesh is given. How? Purva Vruttam Katha Yuktam Itihasam Prachakshate. So Purva Vruttam, the past historical incidents are used in a Katha form to elucidate the wisdom of the Vedas. That's why it's called Pancham Veda. And then you might have heard of Sutra literature. Okay, it does overlap sometimes. It's a compact summary, statements of knowledge, and knowledge about what? Knowledge about everything. Knowledge about technology. There you hear the word Upaveda or Vedanga, right? So Vyakarana. So Patanjali's Bhashya, or not Patanjali, sorry, Panini's Ashtadhyayi is basically given in a sutra form. The grammar is given in a sutra form. You're going to find this with all Shad Darshanas. So it's a technology, it's about medicine. For example, if you look at Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, they are given in a sutra form, sometime in a shlok form. About astronomy, about navigation, about calendars, about philosophy, about science. Okay, so that's a sutra literature. Again, it's trying to bring the wisdom that is there in all the rest of the literatures we talked. Now let's look at what is the emphasis. As I said, Rigveda is the main text. Yajurveda borrows a lot from Rigveda, so does Samaveda, and even Atharva Veda, although Atharva Veda has slightly different focus. If you look at Rigveda, Yajurveda, and Samaveda, you will see this is the emphasis there of Rigveda is towards the Jnana, Yajurveda is towards the Karma, not just in the sense of Karma Kanda. That is, the Western folks have convinced us that the Vedas have nothing but Karma Kanda. Okay, karma, nishkama, and maybe some of our folks internalize that too, even before Westerners taught us. Yajurveda is a nishkama karma. You may begin with, if I do this yajna, give me this. Krishna talks about that in the second, third, fourth, fifth chapter. Initially Sakama Bhakti, but the idea is to go towards Nishkama Bhakti. It's the same thing. And Samaveda, no, Samaveda is about singing, right? And so what does that has to do with the Bhakti? It has to do with the balance, it's like the harmony, or the balance between the swaras. Think of the Bhakti as like having that very balanced outlook towards life, balanced outlooks towards humanity, balanced outlook towards living entities. And Atharva Veda has again a portion of Rigveda. It deals with the psychology, not just the physical elements. It doesn't distinguishes, by the way, and it therefore closely approaches towards Ayurveda. I'm not saying that's Ayurveda, but it gets very close to Ayurveda. Most of the time you will hear Ruk, Yajur, Sama or Tri Veda being mentioned. They are mentioned in that context of Jnana, Karma, Bhakti, and they are also, of course, together. Now, therefore, if you look at a text like Bhagavad Gita, what do you hear? I mean, if you look at the 18 chapters, and of course, great acharyas have classified them in 10 different ways, or as many different ways, as many there are a number of acharyas from their particular context. But suppose if I have to add one to it, or take from one of the acharyas, it's like first chapter is a Vishada Yoga. Arjun is asking the question, Samshaya, that's where the whole thing begins. Samshaya is a very powerful in an Indian context. Not the Samshaya of a mind. That Krishna says, Samshayatma vinashyati, it leads to destruction. But Samshaya of a buddhi. And then second chapter, Krishna actually tells everything. Krishna and therefore Vyasadeva is telling everything that needs to be told. So it could have ended there. And then Arjun asked the question, okay, or Vyasa is making Arjun ask, whichever way you want to look at it. And he asked the question, well, you are saying that this is better, but you're asking me to do this. And then Krishna is saying, well, they're now not different. Initially, while studying, they're different, just like Jnana, Karma, and Bhakti, but eventually they have to be brought together, or they are the same thing. Jnana equal to Karma equal to Bhakti. Someone may look at Jnana plus Karma equal to plus Bhakti. I mean, that's all possible. And Bhagavad Gita is therefore a beautiful synthesis. In fact, therefore, my suggestion always is start with the Bhagavad Gita and then go backwards wherever you want to go. And in most cases, at least it's my conviction, but also my experience. So my Shraddha, but also my Anubhav, that Bhagavad Gita tells you to each individual, like in my case, where to go next. Okay. So, I mean, that cannot be predicted. You can be asking somebody else, then that is not your path, that is somebody else's path. So that's the Bhagavad Gita is kind of a summary, but you can go backwards. Now let's look at quickly some of the specific aspects that are encoded in Vedas, or in what form that wisdom is there. Okay, so if you look at epistemology, I mean, epistemology is like a big complicated word, but it really means the limits of our knowledge. I mean, how much we can know. What are the limits on our knowledge? Okay, so for example, there are many beautiful sukta in Rigveda which really surprise people, those who may not be aware of what's there in Rigveda. But number of you would know this, again, very famous sukta called Nasadiya Sukta. And I just pulled one translation from Wikipedia. But again, remember, this is a Rigvedic Sanskrit. You can get some variations in translations, but this translation, although not perfect, it does a decent job. So Nasadiya Sukta, I'm going to quickly read through it, some of the portions at least. It says there was neither non-existence nor existence. Like this is the cosmology, the creation, okay? Neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. So what stirred? What changed that? Where? In whose protection? There was neither death nor immortality. If there is no birth, then there is no death, and therefore no question of immortality. No distinguishing signs of night nor of day, that one breathed windless by its own impulse, like some existence. What is that? Referring to consciousness, pradnya, okay? Atma, Brahma, whatever the different names you want to give. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness there was at first, by darkness hidden, without distinctive marks, this all was water. That which, becoming by the void, was covered, that one by force of heat came into being. Please pardon the crudeness of translation there. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Like, who does know? How do we know what this whole existence? How do we know? I mean, when did it begin? Who started this? Who created this? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? God came afterwards. So there the question says, well, maybe we should ask the gods. And the answer is given, well, but they wouldn't know because they were also not there. Think of the boldness of conjectures here, okay, which is what is required to do revolutionary science. With the creation of this universe, who then knows where it has arisen, whether gods created it or whether he was mute? The Parama Adhyaksha, the word uses Adhyaksha, the ultimate principle, whatever it is. And then it says, perhaps it formed itself or perhaps it did not. The supreme Brahman of the world, that's a translation for that Adhyaksha, all pervasive and all knowing, he indeed knows. And here the translation says, if not, no one knows. That's not quite the correct translation. He knows, or it says at the last one, Anga Veda Yadi Vana Na Veda. Maybe he knows, maybe he knows not. Okay. So think of the openness that you are saying. Now, this is the wisdom. Now, today, if you go to any cosmology conference, and I have been to few, this is the kind of discussion that is happening. In fact, there is something known as anthropomorphic principle. Like at some point, you should stop asking the questions. That's what modern science says. Okay. For example, so who was there? Or, it's like, well, why the world exists? Well, so that you can ask the question, why the world exists. That's kind of circular answers you would get, because at some point we reach the limits of our knowledge. So that's the kind of wisdom that you will get. This is just one simple example and a very fast example of this. Another I want to give you, again from Rigveda, but as I said, that will apply to Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda, and so on, and even to Mahabharata, to Bhagavad Gita. A pedagogy model, okay, the model of education. Now that's something a lot being discussed around the world, but especially also in India. This is a Rik or a Richa from Rigveda 8 Mandal, 66 Sukta and number 14 Rik. Okay. There are many, I'm not expert at all in Rigveda. There are many ways, you would have seen how they chant in a different fashion. There are different ways of doing it. So for example, a Ghana part would go something like this. Again, as I said, I'm not expert, so forgive my recitation of it. But it's a Om Tvanno Asya Amate Rutakshudo O Abhishaste Ravasprudi Tvanna Uti Tava Chitraya Diya Shiksha Shachishta Datuvita. Now, just at the surface, of course, if you see the details, this is a prayer by Rishis to Indra. Okay, yeah, and that's perfectly fine. Somebody will just take that meaning and therefore use that as a mantra for chanting. And whatever the benefits come out of chanting, a specific enunciation and pronunciation, they will come to that person. Of course, the Shraddha, the placebo effect, everything will come. But now this is been interpreted by few in a few different ways. I'm going to show you one interpretation that I love. In fact, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I presented at one of the conference on education in the Boston, Harvard area, on the pedagogy, the mini symposium. For example, let me just fill this whole thing and then show you. Again, I'll just chant, for example. So, Om Tvanno Asya Amate Rutakshudo Abhishaste Ravasprudi Tvanna Uti Tava Chitraya Diya Shiksha Shachishta Datuvita. So you see where I have taken those words and then placed them. So in a different way, if you go beyond that, it is a praise of Indra or some expectation, some ask from Indra, you can go beyond and see this as a model of education. So here is one Acharya, then here is the student Vidyarthi, and what is the expected outcome. In the prayer, they are asking, Rishis are asking Indra, Tvannosya amate rutakshudo abhishastu. Please give us that thing, I'll tell you what that is, to take care of our amati, our bad thoughts. So like, give us get rid of our ignorance, give us the wisdom. Shuddha, provide the prosperity for us to take care of our Shuddha, the Shuddha of a body, but Shuddha of a mind and intellect. And Abhishastu, which is like Abhishastu literally means curse, but in this case, we take it as a health. Keep us healthy. Healthy, which is what? A balance. Like Ayurveda principle is the balance of a kapha vata pitta, but not just the balance of the body, but balance of the mind, balance of the intellect. Okay, that is also
Hello.
hi. That is also anticipated. And how do we do it? Again, very important. This is what they're saying, rishis are saying is, please share your expertise. Hey, Indra, please share your expertise with us and create a beautiful web. Like when we do a degree, we take some 40 courses, and or if you do MBA, right, you're taking different courses, in different areas and creating a web, that is complete to manage the business. Uti Chitraya, that is the web. Uti is a web, and Chitraya is that, making that whole complete picture there. Uti Shiksha Shachishta Gatuvita. Hey Sreshta Indra, that word Sreshta comes from Chachishta, and Gatuvita is the person means a guide, okay, the pathfinder, the person who shows the path, a mentor. Okay, so they're not asking them saying, please give me what I'm asking. No, please show us, please create this for us, be my mentor. Okay, that's the thing. And what is the outcome? The outcome is that buddhi, a good intellect, okay, ability to produce, to manage Shuddha, and different things such as Ayurveda, for example, but also as a yoga and whatnot, to protect and to keep you balanced, to keep you abhishastu, free from the curses. Now, somebody will ask, actually, the question should come to your mind. So I took that verse and I made this whole thing out of it. I mean, is this not open to interpretation? And the answer is yes, it is open to interpretation. In Marathi, there is a saying, or there is a context said like this, which says, Shabdala kiंवा Shrutila, Shabdala अर्थाचा भार होत नाही, which means the word, the Shruti, is never burdened by interpretations, because you can take multiple interpretation in the context that you're working on. For example, if you have a ruler, okay, in your hand, depending on the context, I mean, it can act as a paperweight, it can act to hit someone, hit a cat or a dog if required, it can be a protective weapon, and it can be used to measure something. But this is indeed a question that is asked. Is this not open to interpretation? So I just want to give you an example. I don't know if you have seen this before. This is known as Arecibo message. There are a couple of variations of this where through radio waves, it is broadcasted out in the space to see if there are aliens out there who might receive the signal, and then they contact the earthlings, us. And hopefully they're not powerful than us, and we say, oh my God, why did I contact them? But one time event that was done in 1974 with the famous Carl Sagan, if you have heard this, and the cosmos and whatnot, they created this message. My point is, if you just look at this message, what does it tell you? And I mean, if it was interactive, I would have asked you that human-like figure is something people may easily spot, but others, they might make some different guesses. And it might lead to different interpretation, and that's actually fine because they are not communicating. So even if we are talking to aliens are going to interpret with their knowledge. Okay, and if it goes to two different planets with different types of aliens, they're going to interpret in two different ways. So this is not something limited or only unique to Rigveda or the ancient Indian narratives. This is true for even what we do in modern times in terms of communication. Okay, so for example, I'm not going to spend time on this, but there is a 1:1 correspondence. Like the first ones are numbers, the second one is a DNA elements, the third one is a nucleotides, the next one is a double helix that you see here, then a humanity, that's the human being. These are the planets, so the sun, then the Mercury, and then this is the Earth, like a distinctly different Mars, and then Jupiter and Saturn. Who is going to figure out, looking at this, that these are the planets? Okay, and what about this as a telescope? But my point is, this information was embedded into this Arecibo message by not some maniacs, okay? I mean, you need to be at the cutting edge to do something crazy like this too. But my point is, they are well-respected scientists, but in trying to keep the knowledge in a compact form, we have to take this route, okay? Quickly. So now some of the doubts that arise with this Vedic literature. One is, of course, about the sequence. Okay, so one thing came first and then second and third and so on. Well, let me give you an example. So if one builds a car, And once you build a car, you may be working in parallel on the manual, but once the car is finally done, the design is done, then you may finalize the manual, and now the manual goes with it. Now, once the car specific model is sold, now it will come for a repair. So now there is a repair manual for a mechanic. So you have a car, there is the car manual for the driver to the user, but there is a repair manual for a repair person. Okay, there may be a marketing brochure. So you think how these things will develop. So yeah, there is a time sequence to it, but not the way the Westerners have made a atrocious nonsensical thing about it, which is to say, and we have internalized it, unfortunately, is that, oh, there was this Samhita, and after a long time, whatever, the 1,000 years or few hundred years, then came Brahmanas, and then came Aranyakas, or sometimes the other view that is used is, then people finally got tired of the karma kanda of a Vedas, and then they started thinking philosophically. Not true. In fact, that's why I'm just pulling this two things here. And then finally, even they were said Upanishad is also too complex, and then they wrote Itihasa. Not true. For example, in Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, we hear the words like Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunyo Bhavarjano, go beyond the three modes, even the Vedas are full of this three guna, go beyond that. Or the Yavan Arthe Udapane Sarvata Samplutodake. What is the value of a Veda? If you know everything, then you don't need Veda, something of that effect. The point is that kind of arguments, that kind of wonderful discussion is there in the Veda itself. So that's why I just wanted to quote one, where he says, hey, the reason the Vedas are composed or the Vedas exist, if you don't understand that ultimate reason why the Vedas are created, the ultimate outcome, ultimate essence, what is the point of even studying the Vedas? So even the Veda itself, Rigveda itself is saying that. Okay. Now their style is different generally. So for example, Krishna will say, Yathechasi tathakuru. I told what I wanted to tell. Don't do this. Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na chashushushve vacha na chamam yobhya suyati. If the person doesn't have a shraddha, don't bother to tell this. Krishna will talk like this. Or now I told you, now you do whatever you want to do. That is a very aparoksha. Now people sometimes confuse those two words too. Aparoksha is direct. Okay, that's the Krishna style at Bhagavad Gita, at least in Bhagavad Gita. Rigveda or Vedic literature is somewhat the other way. Okay, paroksha. It will talk in a passive voice. In fact, in our household, my wife Ashwini always criticizes me. She says, I talk paroksha. So I say, oh, I talk like a Vedas. I will say something indirectly to my children also. I would say, too much juice is not good, just as a statement. And she will say, no juice, we are not buying juice. You're drinking too much. So that's the kind of a difference of a style. Okay, that's what you will see. Quick note on the sutra, and we'll stop and leave some time for question answer. Now, if you start with this Samhita, which is what the Vedas we will say, then the Brahmanas, which are like a manuals for conducting yajna. Aranyaka is the philosophical intuitions and stuff like that. Upanishad is the teaching of that philosophical intuitions or the wisdom of Veda to student, and you can think of that as some abstract notes, like short notes. Okay, and then we can go further. Now, if you synthesize something, and if you want to summarize it, how do you do it? We do this in modern science by formulas. F equal to ma, E equal to mc square. Or if you have to explain relativity in a simple fashion, you would have heard this, like usually in a traditional physics, like classical physics, we would say train comes to the station. In relativity, the quantum physics or Einstein's physics, we can say train comes to station or station goes to the train. Both are correct. So something like this, we just do this in a formula, in a simple way to explain it. That is what sutras are. They're like formula, if you want to consider, which again summarizes that knowledge. For example, I'll go speed up here and I'll just, we'll be done in like 2 more minutes. So Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. In 3 sutra, in the sequence, right at the beginning, this is a Samadhi path, the first out of 4 sections, this is first Samadhi path. And number 7, number 8, number 9, after saying Athato, not Athato, after saying, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, that is the reason, that is the purpose of a yoga, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Okay, now the Chitta Vritti Nirodha doesn't mean we are not using the mind. Okay, it is the balancing of a mind. Then it goes into how to work on certain aspects, and they can be good, but they can be also bad. These 3 sequences is basically giving the whole secret of a modern science. and more, of course. The first one says pratyaksha anumana agama pramanani. He says that's a science. That's how you know the truth. Viparyayo mithya jnanam atadrupa pratishtam. If you don't follow that, opposite of that viparyayo is basically leads to false knowledge. And the third one is a shabda jnananupati vastu shunyo vikalpa. If you claim something, but you don't have a evidence to back it up, basically you are creating vikalpa, you are creating confusion, delusion for yourself, like swarthanuman, but also pararthanuman when you share that with others. Now, if you are a student of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, I'm sure you have heard 5 other different interpretations, and that's perfectly fine, as we talked about right at the Rigveda. Or if you go to, once Patanjali explains this, he says, you know what? So it's not Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. People think like it's not everyone, but people think like it's closing eyes and something. Well, not quite. I mean, that is for practicing and getting that expertise. But then if you go to the third part, then he's saying, how are you going to get this knowledge? He says, Bhuvana Jnanam Surya Sanyaman. If you want to know about the earth and everything that's going on the earth, you have to focus on the sun. By focusing on the sun doesn't mean staring at the sun. Okay, understanding sun's motion and so on. So astronomy comes in picture. Chandre tara vyuhadnyanam dhruve tad gati jnanam. How beautiful. Dhruva, that supposedly doesn't move unless at least in the short term. If you focus on that, if you study everything about the dhruva, you will get the knowledge of all the astronomical motions. Okay, and this is my doubt clearing machine here. Quickly, last one, science, epistemology, ontology. We started with epistemology. If you go to Nyaya Darshana is again giving the formula slightly modified for modern science. Pratyaksha anumana upamana shabda pramanani. And I want to tell you these 2 beautiful ones. This is a way of extracting wisdom from the Vedas. Vedas meaning all ancient literature. Veda simply means knowledge, okay, wisdom. Laukika parikshakanam yasmin arthe buddhi samyam sa drishtanta. What is a drishtanta? That thing. It may be a tool, it may be a story, it may be a joke, it may be a metaphor. That thing which brings laukika, ordinary people, and parikshaka, the expert peoples, in explaining a certain thing, all of them on the same page. Yasmin arthe buddhi samyam, bringing them on the same page with their understanding. That is a drishtanta. These are the this is wisdom, guys, okay? Or for example, remember we started with, what was that? Again, I'm missing the name now, the Sutra, which talks about the cosmology, right? What is important is the science is not about absolute knowledge. We are going from one ignorance to another, but always there is a growth of knowledge. Therefore, if there is a samshaya, there is a doubt about something, it could be date of Rigveda, it could be date of Mahabharata, Ramayana, or it could be anything, it doesn't have to be date. There has to be 2 claims at least to have a discussion to decide which one is better, which one is wrong, or if both of them are wrong. Swapratipakša sthapana hino vitanda. Everyone has heard the word vitandavad, right? Swapratipakša sthapana hino. If you don't have your own position for that particular aspect and you are fighting, you are doing vitanda. So this is, you see, starting with the Vedas, all the way it comes to even Darshana Shastra. And again, the idea behind the Vedangas, Upangas, and Darshana Shastra is to understand that wisdom and apply it. Quick summary, Veda means knowledge, not information, but sutra to transform oneself and others. Consistent focus on wisdom, prosperity, and balance body, mind, intellect, or sharira, mana, buddhi, mano, vak, kaya. These are the words you see time and time again in all the ancient Indian literature. Seva, Sanyam, Satya, they directly corresponds to that. Sharira, mana, buddhi, seva, Sanyam, and Satya. Differences in Samhitas versus Brahmanas versus Aranyaka versus Upanishad versus Ityasa versus Purana Sutra is due to their context. Otherwise, but this is not an encyclopedic knowledge, okay? You think of it, this is like a formulation knowledge. These are the methods given to you, a certain approaches given to you to achieve knowledge for a specific purpose. Operating versus repair manual versus marketing brochure versus cliff notes, if that helps. This leads to different ways of imparting this wisdom, aparoksha versus paroksha. Marketing will do a different way versus once you have bought the car and you go to a repair shop, it will be a different discussion. Wisdom is in front of us. It is not hiding in some book, yet book may provide us the initial impetus. That's why Krishna says, Chandamasi yasya paranani yastam vedasa vedavid. Okay, so the Veda, the wisdom is not hiding in some book, but it's there into the samsara vruksha, into through his branches, through his twigs, and through his leaves. Okay, so with that, actually, I'm done. Now I just want to show you something, how this is an unending game. What I showed you, this 24,000 years, is actually this area, the right of this vertical line. But then the co-conspirators come in. So I have many co-conspirators like Rupa Bhattiji and Jivan Rao and many, like some 20, 30 different researchers, Anil Suri, I would not mention the names. And all their research works, their efforts is allowing us, I just said more than 24,000 years ago, that is this line here, 24,000 years, 22,000 BC. But there is an enormous evidence in every field that you can think of, and that allows us to trace the antiquity of Indian civilization and therefore world civilization. And this particular map is created until 75,000 years, 75,000 BC. We have other map. I will not overwhelm you, going back to 220,000 BC. Keep in mind, as we go back, the evidence get less and less and less, and our confidence about a specific claim sometime may not be as strong as what we have for, say, last 50,000 years. These are my books. Let's see. Okay, we can stop here. I'll stop sharing and let's have any question, comments, objections. Everything is welcome. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Panilaji. I think it was very, very informative as well as very enriching and engaging, I must say, dealing with such a complex subject. I think it was wonderful. Now I'll throw it open for questions by audience. And incidentally, that weekly program that you conduct, is it possible to circulate the link or how one gets to join it?
Okay, great question. I saw that question somebody asking before my talk. The way that works though, and by the way, so you said 80,000 as a number. So Kumarji, 80,000 or 87,000 is the highest that I have seen. It will range from 4,000 to 87,000. Like last few weeks, I know it's around 20,000.
Okay.
These are the students joining through university systems of United States.
Okay.
And so what happens is you have to be student at the university, and that particular university should have subscribed to whatever this platform that I speak through. I mean, I even don't know much details of that platform. So unless you are a student at American universities, I mean, that is something not necessarily available. But what happens is that either a identical talk, similar talk, recorded talk, those talks are placed out on a YouTube. So if you search through Nilesh Oak, usually you still get that talk, if not identical, a similar talk. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. In fact, I will represent facts a little better next time onwards. Yeah. Thank you. Who wants to go next? Ram? You're not audible.
Unmute yourself, please. So if you want to speak.
Yeah, you're okay. No, you're not audible, Ram. Anybody else wants to go in the meanwhile? Lakshmi.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, this Vedas, as we know, has been handed over. That is initially we know that it's just sounds handed over to us. But is there a possibility that over the years, like in various kind of interpretations, there are additions and deletions in this? How can we prove that?
Well, we have a evidence that there were additions. We have a evidence that there were a not recomposition, recasting, re-editing. In fact, I mean, again, it goes to Shraddha at a certain level, but there is a very clear statement in Mahabharata which says that these existed, but Vyasadeva recasted, re-edited for his time. It's like saying the book on physics. Okay, something may be written 150 years ago, then it was recasted, re-edited 100 years ago after Max Planck, then another 50 years ago after Einstein and Heisenberg and everyone came, Bohr and all that. And again, we might do with Fritjof Capra and so on and so forth. I mean, so that goes on. Now, there is a section, as Lakshmiji you would be aware of, who would take the view that they were untouched and that they have not changed and so on. On Shraddha, that's perfectly fine, different interpretation. It can also be understood in a way. I'll give you one example. Say quantum mechanics or a periodic table. Quantum mechanics periodic table. We study quantum mechanics or the electrons and whatnot. In physics, we also study in chemistry. But we study in a different perspective. In chemistry, we study in the context of periodic table. In physics, we study in the context of the physics, the modern physics. And now why do we not study in the biology? Well, we can study in biology, but biology is complex enough that our science has not progressed. So therefore, we choose not to. So that is the same context. And therefore, we have the different Vedas, different recasting.
And there is one Mr. Sriram. You are able to see the screen? Side chat?
If I can see it, yeah, I can see it, yes.
Yeah.
So Sriramji is asking a question, the usual question, was there Vedic civilization, human evidence, and are there any geographic indications, places where the rishis lived mentioned in the Vedas? Okay, the great question, Sriramji. The Veda, again, going back to what Lakshmiji asked in a different fashion. So the current manuscript, you can say, the Rigveda that is available to us, it's known as a Shakala Samvita. Okay, there were many other Samvitas for each of these Vedas, and most of them are lost. But that Shakala Samvita, which came from Vyasadeva and through his disciples, that if you look at the references there, you will find for most part, those references come from, say, you can think of in the modern times, think of Iran, Afghanistan to say central India. Think of as that as a geographical area. Now, the content of the modern content of the current Rigveda is not necessarily from only that area. Okay, but they're referring to geographical locations. But those areas would go to southern India. Those areas would go to what we wouldn't think of India at all, like maybe to other parts of India and so on. Also keep in mind the references to geography, references to river have come as a coincidental information. The idea behind the Rigveda is not to necessarily map the whole geography or anything, but it has happened in the process of that discussion. So let me see the comment again if there was any other question there in that. Yeah, and was there a Vedic civilization? That's another good question, which the part of the question. Well, we are a Vedic civilization. Again, the Westerners will tell us that at certain point, Vedic civilization ceased to exist. Well, that's not true. Okay, we are Vedic civilization. Do we do yajna today? Do we have some Rigveda chanted in some Veda Pathashala? If the answer is yes, we are Vedic civilization. So there was no specific time where we can say it stopped. Okay, from in terms of composition, at some point we would have decided, okay, let's not make any additions to Veda. Therefore, the Itihasa came in, right? We said, well, let's not, interfere with it. Let's write something more. So different types of literature came in. It's like another guide, cliff notes, let's not touch the original book, just create cliff notes, something like that. Yeah, I can read the next one. Janardhan Reddy ji, I was reading about Rishabhadev, the first Tirthankara in Jain history, a comment. One of the reasons, Ramji asking, one of the reasons given as to why Hinduism does not have a name is that there was only Sanatan Dharma. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Just the Dharma is also enough. We need some placeholder to explain it to someone. It's just like, but we have to be careful not to get too much entangled with the word. So like when I take a passport and if it asks me what's my religion, and if I write Hindu, I'm not going to fight with the passport officer, about Sanatan Dharma versus Hindu. It's a practical way of dealing with it. Sanatano, by the way, Yaskacharya in his Nirukta defines that as a Sanatano Nitya Nutana, the one that refreshes itself all the time, that is capable of refreshing itself with the new knowledge that comes in. It is said that he was so I'm reading the comment of Janardhan Reddy ji. It is said that he was
continuation of his previous comment.
Oh, okay. It is said that he was responsible for civilization, and there is a reference to Marichi. According to cosmology, Marichi started Vedic civilization. Does this view hold water? That's a very big question. Okay. Again, it's good to go to Nasadiya Sukta. Like nobody knows, but we can guess. Okay, but we can guess, which is a hypothesis, and we can put forward that hypothesis make predictions. That is a method of science. Like Richard Feynman says, how does science begin? It begins with a guess. Once you make that guess, conjecture, hypothesis, prameya, it creates different predictions. And now all that we can do is take those predictions and see if they match with experiments, match with observations, match with our experience. If they do, then we think our theory appears to be right. But that's all the best we can do. That is the limitation of the ontology, which is like what can be tested, and epistemology, what can be known. And again, one more general comment I would add. Reddy ji, you asked a great question. I mean, this is my approach, but this is also approach of science, I would say, is that always we have to ask the question, what is the basis for my curiosity? Like with that curiosity, what problem I'm trying to solve? In fact, I'll say the science or everything begins, the Samshaya also begins with the toughest unsolved problem. And to solve that problem, we propose a theory. If you look at the whole journey of Nyaya Darshana, Vyasadeva says that in Mahabharata, all the knowledge that we have received is through Sankhya. Sankhya is analysis. But to do the analysis, we need to start with a tough unsolved problem. So ask the question, what is that problem I'm going to solve? So Janardhan ji, I'm not asking you a question, but I'm saying, so you want to know, well, is this Marichi thing correct? The question to ask is, if I solve this problem, if I know the answer, yes, Marichi thing is correct, that is it. What problem does it solve? If it doesn't directly address a problem, we have enough problems to work on. So maybe we should select the problems which are truly unsolved problems. Next one, Ramchandranji. Interestingly, even today, Iran, water is referred in Daya today life. Yes, Daya, Darya comes from there, ocean, river, which is a pure Sanskrit word for water. Absolutely. Why Iran? In fact, it's very important to realize that Iran is India. Now, nobody will accept that today, but Iran is India. So when you look at the genetic studies, in fact, those of you who are in genetic studies, always you will find everything boils down and comes down to Iran. But the bias is so strong, they stop at Iran, almost like Alexander couldn't come further. They stop at Iran. They will not connect the dots and say India. But number of oldest gene, the gene markers, the date, aging of those old markers like M17, R1, everything, it comes to India and goes back to 15,000 years, 25,000 years, 30,000, 60,000. There is one recent paper which talks about, thankfully, it's not written by Indians, so Indians would believe it, right? Because it's not written by Indians. It says people, Homo erectus came out of Africa and Homo sapiens went back to Africa. Okay, I mean, I have given a lecture on that paper too. I don't know if it was recorded, but it's a paper in 2020, okay, written by 2 non-Indians. So Indians can definitely trust it. I mean, they won't have trouble trusting it. And it's talking about a multi-origin model of humanity. That's not a subject, but therefore I'm saying, why just Iran? If you look at Sanskrit and Sanskrit effect on all the languages of, most of the languages, if not all, of Europe, in all different directions, Polynesians. So remember, I told you, like, there are many co-conspirators. I have co-conspirators of all ages, right from 25, Jivan Rao in Bengaluru, to some 85 plus year old, folks in Canada. These are Canadians and Europeans and what working on this Polynesian language and Sanskrit connections and so on. Let me move further. Is there a link for US university students? Yeah, I answered that question. No, unless you are a student, you are not even allowed to join. Okay, I mean, in fact, the platform that runs this, they punish the platform if somebody who is not a student joins it through some sideways, okay. Brata is brother. Yeah, you can see with the Estonian, Latvian languages, the old Yugoslavia, the Slavic languages, you can see those connections.
Yeah. A couple of questions.
Back to you, Kumarji.
Yeah. You have 2 minutes or?
I have a time, but I know that there's a cricket match going to start soon somewhere.
I was wondering, you taking back to Mr. Patanjali's, this one, when you say evidence, it has to be evidence-based. If you look at yoga or even the medicines, traditional medicines, We don't have the same kind of anchoring evidence which will make you question them and come to a adopting them. Everything has to be given by somebody, guru or somebody you just will have to follow, or the Ayurveda or somebody, he just prescribes and you take it without any proof or something.
Yeah.
So isn't he contradicting himself? And that is one question. And second is Sanatana Dharma's open architecture? Like anybody can, get in and, argue and, alter it or give his own version. And I am told there are about 1,300 versions of Ramayana, depending upon this one. Some contradicting on the same terms and conditions. Is its, open architecture its weakness compared to the other, religions which are monotheistic?
Okay, so possibly 2 or 3 questions. So you would have to remind me what was the first, or I can start.
Patanjali is an evidence.
Patanjali and evidence, doesn't that contradict with, say, take Ayurveda? What you will find is what we consider, say, take pharmaceutical, like you might be referring to the pharmaceutical, modern day pharmaceutical pharmacology studies and 2-sample t-test and paired t-test and whatnot. Where we have evidence, like, the placebo effect versus no placebo and control group and so on. We don't have the knowledge how ancients did this research, and I'm not limiting to India. But what is important to know is that the so-called modern chemistry, and I'm not putting that in putting it down. I'm a chemical engineer and I love chemistry. I mean, I still have my notes from 35 years of chemistry. And I can teach chemistry from that notes. That chemistry that we talk today is not more than 150 years old. But my point is, before that, think of Ayurveda, we don't know. We have lost that knowledge as to how the Ayurveda practitioner, the Charaka and Sushruta, how they developed some of these things. We have some knowledge, but not all the knowledge. Maybe super empirical. Like, again, from a chemical engineering perspective, I'll say what we do, 90% plus of it is purely empirical, which means we actually do lots of experiments, collect the data and build a correlation. Okay, that's what we do. Like some of you are familiar with the Reynolds numbers, Stanton numbers, Smith's numbers, and so on. And we write the formula. Okay. And we say the constant, Einstein said constant is our ignorance. When we put the constant, that is our ignorance, right? But the point is, it still works. So we don't know, but we know if you look at the Kapha, Vata, Pitta, and now there are some modern methods. One of my professor's son, Professor J.B. Joshi, his son, he is in Pune, built methods to mimic the Nadi Pariksha, for example, using the modern methods. The Nadi Pariksha, the human being doing still works better, which means the technology has to catch up in some ways. But yeah, your point is valid. Therefore, the quacks can also come and do something. But then I will also tell you the modern chemistry and pharmacology has not stopped the quacks either. So if somebody wants to do it, they will do it. I mean, I do consulting to pharmacy companies, and I've seen what happens now, or the food industry, Coca-Cola and whatnot, But when I'm doing this, I said, this is not it. But they said, no, but we need to still get the product out. I said, then my blessings are with you, even if it's not there. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that happens. So we don't know the method. My conjecture is that it was super empirical. They did so many observations, just like astrology, for example, so many observations, and finally seeing the patterns, like somebody's eating ginger, and what ginger does, and that decides the quality. So that is just my conjecture. We don't know that. But then quickly, I will mention, if we have to compare our ancient, say, medicinal science with the modern medicinal science, I'll take quickly 3. Say prevention, I give a separate talk on that, like a prevention, cure, and patient management. So for prevention, I talk about the vaccination, and you can check those talks, like how vaccination went from India, or read the book Shitala by Mitra Desai. Okay. A cure, which is like literally doing the surgery, the rhinoplasty. I don't know how many of you know that rhinoplasty went from India to outside. After it went from India to outside, Europe created the Association of Surgeons. Otherwise, our expert barbers were doing it until then. Now suddenly, like it put them into a different bucket. And patient management, again, long topic. I have written about it, given a lectures on in Kumbhakarna and Klein-Levin syndrome. Like, we may look at Kumbhakarna description and think it's all exaggeration. It's not exaggeration. I did a double-blind study where if you look at Klein-Levin syndrome, which was created, named in less than 100 years. Now, Kumbhakarna is long before that. If you look at the descriptions of Klein-Levin syndrome, like all the symptoms, they match 1-to-1 to Kumbhakarna in the Valmiki Ramayana. But not only that, today what doctors suggest for Klein-Levin syndrome, it's extremely rare condition, is exactly what treatment was offered to Kumbhakarna as described in Valmiki Ramayana. Now, how they did, unfortunately, we have lost that information. My conjecture is through huge empirical studies. That's my guess, but I could be wrong.
Okay. And Ram has one question. Let that be the last. I think we also will have to let you go. If you are also a cricket fan, you have to watch this one. It is there on the screen. You can read out and answer.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
It is unimaginable that Krishna would have given Bhagavad Gita in 18 chapters. Someone must have compiled it into 18 chapters, possibly Madhusudan, Saraswati or some. That is first question. And second is, we want an elucidation of Atharvana Veda in a separate session. Not much is known except, where is it gone?
Yeah, except some references to occult practices, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, again, I'm not an Atharvana Veda expert, but I would say, I mean, all of us, I'm not a great fan of Wikipedia. In fact, when it comes to Indian civilization, it doles out utter nonsense, but still not a bad place to start on Atharvana Veda. Then there are so many sites now with the whole Atharvana Veda given, but created by Indian government, guys. Okay. Beautiful sites. And the translations, multiple translations. Okay. Just, I mean, all you have to do is search like 10 times Atharvana Veda and you're going to get those sites. But quickly to the first one, it is unimaginable that Krishna would have given Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, correct. 18 chapters. Not only not 18 chapters, Krishna wasn't singing in the Anushtup Chanda. Nor Dhritarashtra, Dharmakshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta, Yuyutsava, Mamaka, Pandavascheva, Kimakurvata Sanjaya. No, he was not doing this. We know this, that Vyasadeva sat down to write Mahabharata about 18 years after the Mahabharata war. And it took 3 years. It is there in the Mahabharata. Now, if somebody wonders how it is there in Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata that we have today is a 4 recensions. Vyasa to Vaishampayan, Vaishampayan to Janmejaya through Romarshana Sauti, and Romarshana Sauti to Shaunaka and Naimisharanya, and somebody documented that. So there are additions to Mahabharata, but not additions happening like in 1400 CE. That is what the Westerners create, that kind of nonsense. Okay, they happen within the 100 years time period. Okay, including the time. So yes, so it is the Vyasadeva who is compiling it, and that is how it is coming to us. So yeah, and it is not in Anushtup. They did not converse in Anushtup Chanda. Okay, and there was no tambourine going on, next to that,
That's good. Thank you so much, Nilesh ji. It was very wonderful, educative, and you brought it down to earth. I must, this one, quite often when you attend these lectures, you keep wondering, whether it was a good waste of time. But I must tell you, the way you elucidated and you elaborated, I think it has clarified a lot of doubts, at least for me. And I'm sure that will be the case with many of them also. And the way we thank is, get all of them on the screen and clap for you. Please, I'm requesting everybody to come on the screen, please.
Yes.
Switch on your video.
I can't switch on.
Thank you so much,
Nilesh ji. And once the IPL is over and there is no other, interference, I would perhaps reach back to you for, similar kind of subjects. Definitely my curiosity is tickled, and of course that is the first basis of furtherance of knowledge, and we will continue to stay in touch. And I must thank Mr. Ram also for suggesting your name, as well as Srikanth is not there in the screen anymore.
Yeah, I think he had joined in between, I thought. Yeah.
Srikanth Joshi also for this one. Best of luck to both you and Ashwini. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Namo Namah.